Well, you're looking to move to Hampton or Newport News and you're trying to figure out which one is best for you. Well, that's what we're talking about today, and we're starting right now. Hey, my name is Sam Santalone and I'm a real estate agent in the Hampton Roads area, anywhere from Virginia Beach all the way up past Hampton, Newport News into Williamsburg. And I do videos every week about living and moving to and how to just do things right in Hampton Roads and in Hampton and Newport News. I help people all over the world move into this area. That's what we do here. And if you have any questions about moving here, my contact information is in the description and I'll do whatever I can to help you. Now, today we're talking all about Hampton and Newport News, the comparison of the two, because a lot of people that move to this area, they're trying to decide between these two. You're not sure which one is the best one for me. So I'm going to talk about these two and compare them in various different categories. So by the time we're done, you'll know exactly which one makes the most sense for you for when it's time to move here. We're going to talk about things like shopping, lifestyle, what's the vibe in the area too, school districts, real estate, all kinds of stuff, so you can have a real good perspective by the time we're done. If you do love my videos, would you please hit that like button for the YouTube algorithms? It really helps my channel out a lot and I would greatly appreciate it. And it helps spread the word to other people like you who might love my videos too. First, we want to talk about where these two cities are in relation to each other and the general area of Hampton Roads. If you look at the map, you'll see two large sections of land in the southeastern section of Virginia. It is the south side, which is where it makes up Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Suffolk. And just across that little water there, which is the Chesapeake Bay, you'll see what's called the peninsula, which is Hampton, Newport News, Williamsburg, Yorktown, Jamestown. All the cities are in counties around there. Now, Hampton and Newport News are on the south section of the peninsula, that northern side of Hampton Roads. And so if you look at Hampton, Hampton's on the southeastern, generally speaking, the southeastern section of this area. And if you go just west of that, that longer strip on the left-hand side, that western side, is Newport News. And so that goes much further up, all the way up the side of the peninsula. So let's talk about the vibe in these two areas and then compare and contrast. So first of all, you got Hampton. I think that from a local's perspective, it's easy to see specific, either you don't like it at all, like you think it's boring, there's not much here, or if you're into history, you might love all the things that are derived from Hampton, because there's a lot of history in Hampton. However, visually speaking and lifestyle wise, from someone who either just moves here or comes here from another state, you might not see much here to make you think that, gosh, I'm really in a rich cultural city. So if you drive through Hampton, you'll see a lot of areas in the south and southeastern part of Hampton that has more of an urban feel. Lots of 1,200, 1,500, 1,800 square foot houses that are like ranch style, like built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. You've got some older ones too, and then you've got on the southwestern corner of Hampton, you're even getting more urban, closer to Newport News, where it's just even more of just an older feel in this area. And I've talked about downtown Hampton before, where if you go into downtown Hampton, you'll drive around and you feel like it's a really nice setting. You've got nice water that wraps around the downtown area, nice little canals, creeks, and some boating access. And it's a really nice looking downtown. However, at the same time, there's not a whole lot there. Not too many restaurants, not too much shopping. In general, it just feels like something's missing. And that seems like the theme in Hampton in general as far as how it feels to live in Hampton. You've got a lot of houses, a lot of functional living. If you need to live near something and want to live in Hampton, there are a lot of different various options for you, but there's not a lot of unique character in the housing, in the buildings, and even in how the roads flow. It just doesn't feel like too unique to me. Now at the same time, if you go on the eastern side of Hampton and the northeastern side, this is where it gets a little bit more rural, a little bit more, there's more land access, and just a lot more like seclusion and quiet. And it feels different than the rest of the city. But as you go further west into the northwestern parts of Hampton, it just feels more commercial, some newer houses in some cases, some houses that are built in older neighborhoods, and just there's not a whole lot of uniqueness to the rest of this area. Now going to Newport News, this is a very unique city. The areas of Newport News are very different, and depending on who you talk to, you might get different opinions. So on the south side of Newport News, you'll feel totally different than the north, east, or west side. And this south side feels like you're kind of more of an urban area. In some places, a lot more run down, and so like these southwestern corners, like near the Newport News shipbuilding area, has more like very industrial, and some older neighborhoods that do have a negative connotation in a lot of cases. So further further north you go, things change quickly. You'll get into areas like historic areas like called Hilton and Oyster Point. And also Kiln Creek. If you go further east, you'll feel more like it is in Hampton, where it's this kind of that industrial, not much character area that feels like just more functional living, not much anything else. But if you go further north and west, that's where things get interesting. For example, on Jefferson Avenue, you'll see an area near the airport that has some uniqueness to it and a lot of stores near Oyster Point. Going west, you'll see an area called Warwick as well as Hydenwood. In areas near you see Christopher Newport University. This area feels totally different than the rest of Newport News. Lots of character, lots of trees, real secluded into the corner, near water, and parks up here too. This is some of the best waterfront property for the price in anywhere in the peninsula, and sometimes even in the south side. And so on the west side, it feels totally different, and I think you might get some of your best value anywhere in the peninsula on this western side of Newport News if you like the drive from that area to wherever you're going to be working. To me, I like the Newport News west side better than any part of Hampton or any other part of Newport News, so I give a slight lean to Newport News for vibe, my personal preference in vibe. So now let's talk about the shopping in Hampton and Newport News. Well, first of all, Hampton. So there's not a whole lot of widespread shopping in Hampton. However, there is one section called the Coliseum Square area, which used to be Coliseum Mall, which has turned into more of an open air, larger shopping area that is a little bit more modern, has some good shopping, Kroger, Aldi, and Target, and Walmart. So it's all centralized in this Coliseum Square section. So for all your shopping needs, essentials, you might live like 15-20 minutes away from Coliseum Square, but for the most part, you might find yourself going back to this area quite a bit. Now, there are other grocery stores, more mom and pop places. Food Lions are more prevalent in Hampton as well, so you're not gonna have to drive there all the time. But for most of the shopping you're gonna be needing, I'd say Coliseum Square fits the most needs. For grocery stores in Hampton, you'll notice the most frequently placed grocery store is Food Lion. There's a lot more Food Lions than anything else in Hampton. Now, going over to Newport News, there is more shopping options and more widespread. Now, Jefferson Avenue has two distinct sections that kind of bleed together, have a lot of shopping in it. Oyster Point and City Center has a lot of stuff, like for example, Whole Foods, a lot of good restaurants, grocery stores. You got Harris Teeter, Kroger all through this area as well. And also going up north towards the Newport News Airport, near a place called Pentrick Henry Mall. So you'll see that long stretch on Jefferson Avenue and also on Warwick have a lot of shopping options. And you've got your Target on Jefferson, you've got the mall, not as big of a deal there for me, but you've got a Walmart there, more restaurants up and down Jefferson Avenue. It's a long street, and so if you go further west on Warwick Boulevard, you're gonna find more shopping there as well. And that's kind of the theme comparing Newport News to Hampton as far as shopping. There's a lot less in Hampton compared to Newport News. You got more big box stores in Newport News, more accessible places, more restaurants. So which one wins? Newport News wins in regards to shopping. Now let's talk about things to do in Hampton and Newport News. You got the Hampton Coliseum, which is a big performing arts center, has lots of bands. I've seen plenty of bands here play, theater, you got conferences, all kinds of stuff. Monster truck stuff would be here all the time. And it's right off of the interstate. You can see it. It's kind of this weird shape. And we seem to be known for our weird shaped performing arts centers as well as scope in Norfolk. But in addition to that, you got Fort Monroe, which was a decommissioned army base. It's the largest stone fort in the United States. There is a big preserve back in the northeastern corner called the Grandview Nature Preserve. And you'll see some parks sprinkled intermittently in the city of Hampton, but it's not a whole lot, especially if you compare it to Newport News. And one of the things I find most interesting about Hampton is it has a specific oak tree, not just any oak tree, the Emancipation Oak, which is in the grounds of Hampton University near downtown Hampton, and it is the place where the Emancipation Proclamation was read for the first time in the South. And the National Geographic Society has it as one of the top 10 great trees of the world. And back in the 1700s, this place had a ton of pirates, believe it or not, and the Blackbeard Festival, which is a local festival, which is a real popular one in Hampton, commemorates this time period back in the 1700s. And then the thing I probably went to the most when I was a kid, the Air and Space Center, which is in downtown Hampton, which also has an IMAX theater in it. I would go to this place all the time, especially as a kid, field trip. But in Hampton, you also have Buck Row Beach. Now, this is, I'd say, of all the places in and around the peninsula, this is the beach that is the closest to anything you'll see in Norfolk or Virginia Beach or anywhere on the south side. This is an actual beach. It's a real tightly knit community. It has a lot of history here, decades of history. And so some people have grown up here and stayed here for their entire lives. So if you want to live on the peninsula and want to be near a beach, this is probably the #1 spot to go to. But the drawbacks to Buckrow Beach is you don't have as much shopping. There's no like touristy stuff all around there as much as you would see like in Virginia Beach or Norfolk. But going over to Newport News, you've got other things too. You got the Ferguson Center of Arts, which is in Christopher Newport University, another performing arts center. Closest thing to the Hampton Coliseum that Newport News has, but not nearly the same scale. But over on this western side, you've got a lot more nature, so good museums. The Mariners Museum, the Virginia Living Museum, which is an awesome one and set in a really cool spot. Then you have lots of parks, lots of trails. This western side of Newport News is awesome, and it's got a nice, cultured, real mature feel to it, and you kind of feel like you're set apart from the rest of the area, just even though you're not too far away because you're near the water, you're near all those trees. And so you've got a lot of parks, running trails, all this access along the western side of Newport News, and we'll talk about the real estate in this section later and why it's one of my favorite parts of the entire peninsula. And then also the Newport News Park, which is in the very northern tip of Newport News. A really big park, you can camp out there. And this is a personal thing. Buckrow Beach makes Hampton's things to do very close to me compared to Newport News, but I'm not a beach guy. So if you do love beaches, you might actually pick Hampton more than Newport News. But for me, I don't like beaches as much. I like the nature, I like the quiet, I like the relaxed feel of the western side, all those parks and trails. I pick Newport News over Hampton for things to do. Now locals, if there's anything in here that I am missing, things to do, shopping, comment below and let the people know that are planning to move here what else is here. Now schools. Now you may have heard, if you do some research, you might see that Hampton and Newport News school districts are not highly ranked in the area compared to other areas. And so the highest ranked ones, according to like niche.com, or Kickingham High School in Hampton, as well as Warwick High School in Newport News. There are a couple in Newport News elementary schools that are pretty highly ranked as well. Deer Park is one. Hilton and R.O. Nelson are a couple others too. But in general, this area is not known for its schools. So if you have other alternatives, there are some private schools here as well. Hampton has Hampton Christian, Hampton Roads Academy, and then if you could also go into Williamsburg, Walsingham is another high demand private school. But this is one of the reasons why you've got cheaper options for real estate in these areas, because these schools are not as highly ranked according to online publications. So if I had to choose between the two, honestly it's kind of a push. They're both about the same to me as far as rankings go. From where my analysis goes, I will drop some links below for you so you can see and do some due diligence to determine which one makes the most sense for you if you do want to do public school in Hampton or Newport News. Now let's talk briefly about traffic. So if you look at Hampton and Newport News, you'll see that tunnel, those two tunnels really. You got the Monitor Merrimack Bridge Tunnel on the left or the western side, and you have the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel on the eastern side. Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel connects Hampton to Norfolk, and the Monitor Merrimack Bridge Tunnel connects Newport News down towards Suffolk and Chesapeake. Both Newport News and Hampton, though, however, use the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel about the same amount. So the traffic and your accessibility to other areas, even in Newport News and Hampton going across town, can be influenced based on how far you have to drive down Interstate 64 and through traffic as it backs up through the tunnel. So I want to specifically say the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel itself backs up all the time. So you look at the distance between you in Hampton, Newport News, and Norfolk is not very much as far as the actual distance goes. That tunnel really throws a wrench into everything. You could be thinking you're 20-25 minutes away from Norfolk and Hampton, and it takes you 50 minutes or longer, an hour or so, getting back and forth because this tunnel backs up so much. Each city, Hampton and Newport News, has their own issues with traffic. Depending on where you work and where you spend most of your time will influence your general traffic experience. If you want to be down in the south side on a regular basis, whether it be you're commuting down there, you have more friends down there, it might not be very quick for you if you live in Hampton or Newport News to get down there. It doesn't matter if you live in the north part of the cities or the south part of the western and eastern parts, they can still create a problem. Now, for example, though, if you work at Langley Air Force Base, and you live in Hampton, you don't have to deal with all that traffic as much. You can go straight to work and back. It's not going to be as big of a deal. It might take you only 15, 10, sometimes less minutes and if you live in Hampton and commute to Langley. Same you can go for if you live in Newport News as well. It might take you 20, 25 minutes to go across town. It'll be some traffic there, but not nearly as much as if you had to drive through the tunnel. So I think between the two of them, Newport News does win as far as traffic goes, just barely. Now let's talk about the real estate. So real estate in Hampton and Newport News have some similarities, but then a lot of differences. So Hampton has a lot of those older style neighborhoods in them, like those Cape Cod in a lot lot of cases. Like those 40s, 50s, and 60s houses, lots of ranch style houses, and some smaller houses, which in turn means that the house prices can be more like in the lower price ranges. So for example, you can have a house in many areas of Hampton in the under $200,000 price range, $250,000, under $300,000. And the further south and southwest you go, generally speaking, the more affordable it gets, down into the hundreds and $200,000 price range. And then also going further east as well in some spots. The further north and northeast you go into that corner, that country area, that more land, that's where things start getting a little bit more expensive, starting in like the upper 2s, 300s, 400s, you can get up there pretty easily, and into the 5s and 6s depending on where you are in that section. Now going further north near the water, that's where the things you could get houses, $600,000, $700,000, and along the water near Buckrow Beach, you could be upwards of $800,000, $900,000, over $1 million depending on where you are near Buckrow Beach. But in going further north and northeast, you got places like Fox Hill, Willow Oaks. A lot of these more secluded neighborhoods up in the northeastern corner of Hampton are really nice, and for the price, it's not bad at all. The drawback, the further north you go, you'll start dealing with flood insurance as you get close to the water, and so just check your flood maps and talk to your real estate agent to make sure that the house that you see might look like it's cheap, but it might be because the cost of flood insurance might also be boosting up the payment as well. As you go further north and in west and central in Hampton, it gets a little bit more kind of like there's some nice housing. It's functional housing, but not a whole lot of unique character, like this kind of basic housing. Now in the south and southwestern sections of Hampton, it's a totally different area. This is the older sections. Now you got places like Wythe, going further southwest, even going into Newport News, you'll notice a distinct area difference between that section and over in the north and eastern sections. It has some rundown spots. There are some waterfront areas right on the water on Chesapeake Avenue that I think are great, from like that $500,000, $600,000 price range. But going off the water and then going further south and southwest, it's not as appealing to a lot of people, and so they find themselves going further north again if they want a specific kind of neighborhood. But now going to the Newport News section, you notice Newport News, because it's so long and narrow, the southwestern corner of Newport News feels totally different than the rest of Newport News. So that southwestern corner, you'll be into the downtown area of Newport News, like the areas near the Newport News shipyard. This has a little bit more of an urban feel to it. Some places are run down, and it definitely feels like an older part of town. And so some of these areas do have lots of cheaper real estate, but they're not always in high demand. You can still find plenty of real estate in the southwestern part of Newport News in the 100s very easily. Going further north, you'll start seeing them trickle into the 200s, and then going into the western side of Newport News, the central west side, that's my favorite part. I want to talk about this. You got several great neighborhoods in here. Going near that area I was talking about, near Christopher Newport, near the Mariners Museum, Living Museum. This area is so cool. Lots of nature, lots of trees in these neighborhoods going further towards the water. Real secluded, and so you're near Warwick Boulevard, you're near Jefferson Avenue, you're near all the stuff where all the shopping is, but you're tucked away in the corner. This is what I love. This is why I like parts of Virginia Beach. It has the same feel to it. This is the common theme in this section of Newport News, and this is why it's one of my favorite parts of the entire area of the peninsula. You've got, for the price range, you can get a house in the 400s, sometimes 300s in this section. Get an awesome house, even sometimes less than 300. But you got the accessibility to things to do, you've got the water, the James River, you've got the easy access up and down Warwick Boulevard, all the way down towards the south side of Hampton Roads. Areas like Riverside. Another one of my favorites is Beverly Hills. I love a section also called Hilton, which is kind of like a little downtown, an old historic downtown. Has some really unique houses off the side streets, off of this main downtown area. And Hilton also goes down to the water. You'll see some waterfront property upwards over $1 million. Now if you go further north, up towards like the north area near Fort Eustis, this is where houses are, again, you're not going to see as much character up here. A lot more functional housing, but newer compared to Hampton. You'll see a lot of neighborhoods like built in the 80s, the 90s, and sometimes even in 2000s up towards this northern section. But you're kind of losing the uniqueness and the character of a lot of the areas you might see in the western side. But price ranges all through here, they can be anywhere from in the 200s, 300s, sometimes 400s. So this is functional. The housing is not as expensive as in other parts of the Hampton Roads area, but you're going to have some drawbacks, and one of them is school district. So a lot of times it's all about finding the value spots, the best bang for buck in a lot of these areas in Newport News and Hampton. To me, the best bang for buck anywhere in these two cities is the western side of Newport News, near Hydenwood, near James Landing. That whole western section near Oyster Point is the part that I think is the best. I would go after myself. Now, talking about crime, I'm not going to say anything specific as far as numbers go because it gets a little bit touchy there, but I do encourage you to do some research and check statistics so you can see like the best spots or the spots you might be most interested in. But I want to point out one phenomenon that I think will help you as you're doing your research for crime. That will tell a lot of stories about like why people say they do or don't like Newport News, or why they do or don't like Hampton. Let's talk about some specifics. I want to show you some color-coded maps based from Trulia's crime maps. If you look at Hampton, let me show you the crime maps on Trulia so you can see a trend here. If you notice, all across the Hampton area, you see a lot of places where, again, these color-coded spots are the darker the blues, the higher density of crime there is according to Trulia's crime maps. If you notice, it's kind of sprinkled all around. You see, like there are some spots that are dense, some spots where it's like looks like nothing at all. That's kind of the way it is. If you live in certain spots, you might have a different perception of what Hampton is compared to other spots. It's all very different. Same goes with Newport News, but in a very like even more extremes. The western side of Newport News, this is so dense, like compared to the rest of the area. Look at Newport News in general, you see a lot of dark spots and then lots of nothing. Depending on where you live in Newport News, it really changes what your perception and what your experience might be in the city. So the same goes with those cities. And so just make sure when you ask people about where you should live, when they say, oh, you should live in whatever city, ask them why and where they lived, and see if you can do some more research to find out what their personal experience might have been compared to what yours might be. So which one wins? Well, to me, for several reasons, like for instance the nature, the whole feel on the western side of the city, the styles of houses, the types of neighborhoods in these sections. For all these reasons, I pick Newport News over Hampton personally because of these things. There's some people that love Hampton over Newport News because of the history I've talked about, also the beach, Buckrow Beach, but I'm not a beach guy, so I'm not going to factor that in as much myself. So this is definitely a personal decision, but if it were me, I lean Newport News over Hampton. Just a little bit. Now, if you have any more questions about living or moving to Newport News or Hampton, let me know. You can I'll drop my contact information in the description. I'll do whatever I can to help you relocate into this area, and I will see you on the next video.